Carb loading before a race, eating a bowl of pasta, eating a slice of pizza the night before your race. We've all heard about it, but does it really help? Should you be doing it, and if so, how? Today we talk about carb loading, what are the benefits, what are the risks. I'm going to give you very specific tips from my experience as to when to use it, when to not use it, and also very specific guidance on how to do it properly and what are common mistakes to avoid. Hi, Simon here. I'm a long distance endurance athlete, and today we talk about carb loading. And there's a lot of myth about carb loading. There's some benefits to it, but a lot of risk too. So today we're going to dive into that, explore some of these myths, and understand how you can actually use this tool to improve your performance. And the tips I'm going to provide today are applicable and fairly general, so you can apply them to any endurance event. So we're talking about, for example, marathon running, triathlon, ultra running, cycling. It's the same concept, the same benefits, but the same risk. And just like any topics that there's a lot of myths surrounding it, it can be controversial, but the source is not just trust me bro. The source is also having talked with several sport dietitians and also having read a little bit of the research. But I'm by no means a registered dietitian. I'm just a guy running and having some experience.
Would you like to know more?
And first, let's get rid of some of the myths out there. What is carb loading and what is it not? One of the common misconceptions is that carb loading will make you faster. And that is false. Carb loading will help you maintain the same pace for a longer period of time. If, for example, you would go for a 1 mile run, you won't go faster because of carb loading. It doesn't make sense. Another very common myth is that you can carb load instead of fueling in the run. That is also false. Yes, you can have more glycogen so you can sustain your pace a little longer, but it will not replace fueling during the race, which is a great source of energy. And I highly suggest that you train and practice fueling during your run because it will still be important on race day. Then a big one, carb loading is fun. You eat everything you want to eat. That is very false. If you enjoy carb loading, it's probably because you're not having enough carbs, so you're actually not getting any real benefit from it. If you carb load appropriately, it will not be fun. It will be very uncomfortable, which leads us to the last myth. Carb loading is, for example, eating a bowl of spaghetti the night before or eating some pizza. That is absolutely false. A bowl of pasta the night before the race, first, it's too late. Second, it's not enough.
Would you like to know more?
So now that we got these myths out of the way, let's talk about the science. And I do have a PhD in biomedicine, so these things are very familiar to me. I'm going to try to vulgarize, but also make it as simple as possible so that you have enough understanding to understand the concept and apply it to your runs. But I won't swamp you asking to redraw the Krebs cycle. That is PTSD territory for a lot of people. I'm not going to do that today. When you contract your muscle, you need energy. And the currency, the cash, is ATP. ATP is what your muscle are actually using to contract your muscle. But ATP is gone almost instantly, and you need to replenish that ATP. A system that exists, for example, is phosphate creatine, and it will be able to replenish very quickly your ATP.
I got a $100 check from my grandma, and my dad said I need to put it in the bank so it can grow over the years.
Well, that's fantastic. A really smart decision, young man. Currency accounts with compounding interest, and it's gone.
What?
It's gone. It's all gone. Next, please.
Dad!
Hey, I'm trying to teach my son the importance of savings. You already lost his money? Oh, Mr. Marsh, don't worry. We can just transfer money from your account into a portfolio with your son, and it's gone! This line is for people who have money with the bank only. Please step aside.
The issue with both systems is that they will be depleted very quickly. So this is very helpful when you need a high burst of energy. For example, if you're at the gym and you're lifting weights. So when we talk about endurance sports, we talk about sports that will use energy from other sources. And there's really two sources of energy here. One will be carbohydrate, sugars, and the other one will be fat, lipids. And they both have their purposes, and we also use both at the same time. We often say you're in fat burning zone, but that's an oversimplification. We always use a ratio of both depending on the intensity of the exercise. The advantage of carbs is that you can burn a lot of energy through carbs. It's not rate limiting. The issue with carbs is that we don't have an infinite supply. We store carbs in the form of glycogen in our muscles and in our liver, and you have about a reserve of about 500 grams in your body. So that's about 2,000 calories worth of energy, which is a lot. It can bring you pretty far, But there is a limit of how far you can go just on your stored glycogen. And that's where fat comes in. We have a lot of energy that is stored in fat. You will never run out of energy through fat through endurance event. The twist is that it's harder to metabolize fat, so you cannot get just as many calories per hour burning fat. There is a limit there. And that's where when you go into a zone 2 or a lower intensity, you can have a high portion of your calories coming from fat because you don't need just as many calories per hour. But when you run faster, when it's more intense, when you're closer to your VO2 max, now you need to also use carbs to compensate for this balance that cannot come from fat burning. So why does it all matters? It matters in the context of a race, for example, a marathon, where you're going too fast, you're burning too many calories per hour to only be using fat. You will need to use your glycogen. The problem with that, as we mentioned, is that there's a finite amount of glycogen in your body, and at some point you will run out. And what happens when you run out? When you're depleted of carbs, you bunk. Basically, you're out of fuel. Think about your car, there's no more gas in your car.
Would you like to know more?
And that's where the notion of carb loading comes in. Make sure you fill up the gas tank before you go on a road trip. In other words, make sure that you have as much glycogen as you can in your body before you start your race. And research support that idea. Research support that if you carb load appropriately, you could improve performance by 1, 2, 3%. So there is a benefit, but it's a marginal benefit. And what does the 1, 2, 3% actually translate to is a little bit more complex. It doesn't mean that you can go faster. Again, you didn't create anything new. You're not creating new metabolic pathway. You don't have stronger legs. The only difference is that you'll be able to run on glycogen for a longer period of time, meaning your pace won't necessarily be faster, but you're able to sustain that pace for a longer period of time, which of course is beneficial if you would be running out of gas, if you would be running out of carbs. So although the benefit is incremental, you've trained so much, of course you want to do everything you can on race day to have a better day. But how do you do that? How do you make sure that you have enough glycogen in your body to race your race? And the reason I went through all of this theory and explanation, it's because I think carb loading sometimes makes sense, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And it's good for you to understand, should I really be carb loading right now?
Would you like to know more?
Conceptually, when should you use carb loading? There should be two conditions present. First, you have an endurance event where you will burn calorie faster than you can burn fat. The second condition that is very important is that you expect, based on the duration, that you will actually burn through all of your reserve of glycogen. And practically, what do these mean? Well, about the intensity. If you go for a hike, the intensity is lower and therefore most of your energy will actually come from fat. So there's absolutely no reason to carb load before going on a long hike or a backpacking trip. The other aspect of burning through your glycogen reserve is a lot about duration of the event. If you go for a 5K, there's no reason to go for a carb load. If we think about the car example again, if you go to the grocery store, unless the car is actually depleted from gas, you don't need to make sure that you fill the tank to the max. And practically, for me, for example, it makes the most sense to carb load for an event like a marathon or a 50K. If it's shorter than that, a half marathon, 10K, 5K, at least for me, I know that I will have enough glycogen to finish these races. Whereas on the other side, if you think about races that are 100 mile, 200 mile, I don't see the benefit of carb loading because what is really important is to make sure that you can metabolize fat as fast as possible and that you're able to fuel eating. The gain that you will have from having a little bit more of glycogen is something that will just disappear very quickly. And the last one, the last warning, the big one, is that I don't think you should carb load for the first time during a big event. There is a risk that you will have GI issue. So I would recommend that you try that, not necessarily before your big race, to see that you can indeed tolerate it.
Would you like to know more?
And how should you carb load? Very specific. What does the data show? So there's a lot of protocol out there that have demonstrated benefit. First is how many carbs should you be eating? And we're talking about an 8 to 10 gram of carbs per kilogram of your weight per day for about 1, 2, or 3 days. And it depends on the source for the duration. The longer you do it, the more uncomfortable you will be, but also conceptually, the more likely your glycogen reserve will actually be at maximum. But overdoing it is not beneficial either. If you're not raising your eyebrows at the 8 to 10 gram per kilogram, make the math for yourself. What's your body weight and what would it mean? Because for example, someone who's about 150 pounds, which is about 70 kilograms, we're talking about 500 to 700 grams of carbs in a day. If you're not raising your eyebrows, again, let's make some math and think about what this actually means in terms of food. Here's some example of portion that are only 15 grams of carbs. 15, 1-5, not 50, which means you need to have about 40 portion of anything in this table. Even the classic bowl of rice or bowl of pasta, that's about 40 to 40 grams of carb. You need to have 10 times that. So your one bowl of pasta the night before the run absolutely does not fit the criteria of carb loading. You're just having a normal meal, which potentially is what you should be doing, but it's not carb loading. It's fairly common to have GI distress and not feel great, which is one of the reasons I don't necessarily recommend it for everyone. Also, one important detail is typically we recommend, eating brown bread or having brown rice. It's healthier because of the fiber. But when you reach these amounts, typically it's recommended that for carb loading, because of the amount, you should actually be using white rice, for example, not brown rice, because it's just too many fibers. You will have a lot of GI distress. So what are my takeaways? Do I carb load? When do I carb load? What do I think about all of that? Before we dive into that, just a reminder, I'm not a registered dietitian. If you're curious to hear about what a sport dietitian specialized in endurance training think, we had a great episode with Alyssa on my Buckle Up podcast with Brian and Simon, which I'll put the link here. It's episode 43, and in this episode, we talk about carb loading, where she gives her advice, and we discuss a little bit the benefit of it. But we also talk about a lot of other interesting subjects when it comes to fueling or nutrition in endurance sports. And just to give you a few, we talk about creatine, we talk about ketone, we talk about BCAA, so a branched chain amino acid, we talk about bicarbonate system, we talk about fasting, we talk about carb loading. And for me, that was a very interesting conversation because there's so many myths out there about fueling that it's good to talk with someone who's actually a registered dietitian following actual evidence. And through her clinical practice with her clients, she also has practical experience of what has worked and what has not worked with her athletes.
Would you like to know more?
So what do I think about carb loading in general? I think it's overrated because people don't understand what's the actual use. There is some benefit to it. 1, 2, or 3% is an actual benefit. It's not nothing. And you train so much for marginal gain that anything that can help when you're performance driven is pretty important. But those benefits are not magical. It's not just you're faster, poof, you add 1%, 2% of speed. No, it will only be helpful if you're going to burn through your reserve of glycogen. And that only happens for me if I run a marathon or a 50K. And it will be helpful because, of course, I'm fueling at the same time, but fueling a little bit less will be a little easier and I can run a little bit better. But when you talk about very long distance ultramarathon, like a 100-mile or a 200-mile, just like the car situation, if you do a road trip that is a 2, 3, 4-hour drive, filling the gas tank before will be sufficient to reach the destination. But if you're doing a road trip from New York to LA, it's great, of course, to not start with no gas in the tank. But what will be very important is that you will need to stop at gas station and put more gas in the tank. And it's exactly what's happening in ultramarathon. I think a lot more of your focus and preparation should be about how to fuel properly during your run and still be able to go. And also doing the things that will help you burn fat faster. And there's a few things that you can do. First, a lot of zone 2 training will be helpful, but also having these higher intensity workout like interval session and things that can increase your VO2 max. The other aspect that is very important, but not as glamorous, and people don't talk about it as much, is that during your training, you should have a balanced diet. You should fuel properly. If you're constantly in calorie deficit, you won't have as good training. And by doing that, you're maintaining a decent amount of glycogen in your muscle and your liver. Because the goal of carb loading is not that you start at 0 gram of glycogen in your muscle and liver and now you go to 500. No, you have some. You're not bunking right now. You already have a fair amount, and realistically, I don't know the numbers, but realistically, you're probably increasing the amount of carbs that you have by 50 gram or 100 gram through this protocol. You don't double the amount of glycogen. And sure, that's nice. If you have 100 gram more of glycogen in your muscle, that 100 gram of carb is about 4 or 5 miles depending on your body weight. So there is a benefit there, but it's a drop in the ocean when you look at the 100 mile. Whereas when it's a marathon and you do 26 mile, 5 mile is actually a significant difference. But is it worth it? Because there's a cost associated to carb loading. Yeah, if you're having a bowl of pasta the night before, just do that. That's fine. You're happy with that. Sure, call it carb loading if you want. You're not actually carb loading, but hey, it makes you happy. That's what you should be doing. But when you carb load with these protocols for 3 days, you will feel pretty bad. You might have very bad GI issue. And that's it, folks. Everything you need to know about carb loading in different sport and different distance. If you think this video was helpful, please leave a thumbs up, a comment below, share with your friends. It's helping my channel grow. And if you want to learn more, for example, which individual will respond better to carb loading, listen to our Buckle Up episode 43 with Brian and Simon with Alyssa. As always, thanks for watching and see you next time.